Hello, today is the 22nd of March 2023, and we'll talk about the very important Japanese architect, one of the most important, Kenzo Tange. Let's read a little bit about him. Kenzo Tange was born in September 1913, but died on the 22nd of March 2005, so just 8 years ago. Exactly on this day, was a Japanese architect and winner of the 1987 Pritzker Prize for Architecture. He was one of the most significant architects of the 20th century, combining traditional Japanese styles with modernism and designed major buildings on 5 continents. His career spanned the entire second half of the 20th century, producing numerous distinctive buildings in Tokyo, other Japanese cities and cities around the world, as well as ambitious physical plans for Tokyo and its environs. Tange was also an influential patron of the metabolism movement. He said it was, I believe, around 1959 or at the beginning of the 60s that I began to think about what I was later to call structuralism, a reference to the architectural movement known as Dutch structuralism. Influenced from an early age by the Swiss modernist Le Corbusier, Tange gained international recognition in 1949 when he won the competition for the design of Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. He was a member of SIAM, Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne, in the 1950s. He did not join the group of young Siam architects known as Team 10, though his 1960 Tokyo Bay plan was influential for Team 10 in the 1960s, as well as the group that became known as Metabolism. His university studies on urbanism put him in an ideal position to handle redevelopment projects after the Second World War. His ideas were explored in designs for Tokyo and Skopje. Tange's work influenced a generation of architects across the world. This was the man. He lived a long life, died at 90-something, 97 or so. And indeed, a very important architect for Japan and the world. Here he is with his camera near a building by Le Corbusier in Ahmedabad in India. Here he is again. Here he is contemplating one of his buildings. From what I understood, he lived for a while in China when he was a kid with his parents, and then I don't know what they were doing in China, but they returned to Japan. But he was Japanese. Here he is with Japanese metabolists. He's in the middle. I love this period in Japanese architecture. These young people who wanted to, escape the dark shadows, the severe shadows of the Second World War and reconstruct Japan with sacrifice, with very hard work and inspiration and courage. They made very courageous proposals. They were visionaries, actually. The architect as a hero. Architects today tend to depreciate themselves, to regard themselves as no more than just ordinary citizens without the power to reform the future. Well, I would say he's correct. And I think we need people like him to remind us that without arrogance, the architect could be a catalyst for change. The architect could be an agent of transformation, the transformation of society and of life itself. There is a powerful need for symbolism. And that means the architecture must have something that appeals to the human heart. Human heart, not human brain. There is a powerful need for symbolism, and that means, I don't know, it's written twice, and that means the architecture must have something that appeals to the human heart. Indeed, inconsistency itself breeds vitality, wisdom. Yes, inconsistency. That is even a contradiction. No? In 1953, Tange and the architectural journalist and critic Noboru Kawazoe were invited to attend the reconstruction of the Issa Shrine. The shrine has been reconstructed over 20 years, and in 1953, it was the 59th iteration. Normally, the reconstruction process was a very closed affair. But this time the ceremony was open to architects and journalists to document the event. The ceremony coincided with the end of the American occupation, and it seemed to symbolize a new start in Japanese architecture. In 1965, when Tange and Kawazoe published the book Ise, Prototype of Japanese Architecture, and is a magnificent book, and I'm lucky to have it, he likened the building to a modernist structure, an honest expression of materials, a functional design, and prefabricated elements. I mentioned the Issa Shrine the other day because it is an interesting way in which Japan keeps the very meaningful Issa Shrine continuously young and alive. There are two sites, one near the other. On one side exists a built shrine, and every, here I see 20 years, but anyway, let's say every 20 years, they built on the adjacent site, which is empty, exactly what is on the first site. And then they destroy what is on that side. And 20 years later, they do the same. So there is this alternation in, I don't know, 11 centuries or so, more than 1,000 years, the Issa Shrine was continuously rebuilt, built, destroyed, rebuilt, built, destroyed, rebuilt. And today it looks like it looked like 11 centuries ago. And it is a formidable architecture, although formidably modest. And here we see what I try to explain, the two adjacent sites. And this is the new iteration, is exactly what is here, but rebuilt. And then this land is freed, the buildings are destroyed. And then 20 years later, they rebuild what is here on the other side, and then they destroy what's here. So in this way, there is the Ise Shrine continuously in good shape, continuously young, so to speak. But it's a very important shrine in the Shinto tradition, and it's dedicated to Amaterasu, the formidable, the magnificent sun goddess, because in Japan, the god associated with the sun is a goddess, a woman, Amaterasu. And here it is. The great Ise Shrine in Japan, building and context. Now, Kenzo Tange, 1951, 1953, his own house in Tokyo, still inspired by tradition, but with a certain modernism. although he was skeptical, he did declare that tradition has its limits. If you try to belong to your time, you cannot rely. He put it in a clearer way than I do, but he seemed to be skeptical that dwelling on the past was the way moving towards the future. And he said that actually tradition became, although this is contradicted by this very building he built, but this is one of his earliest buildings, if not the earliest. The tradition is not easily any longer a source for creativity. Something was broken, perhaps, in the course of modernity speeding up. But this is contradicted again by this very project, his own house, from that time. Quite a large piece of land now. I mean, in Tokyo or near Tokyo, obviously Kenzo Tange was doing well for himself. I don't know exactly why I put this picture here with a cemetery and this is the Hiroshima memorial that he built. But I don't remember why I included these two pictures here. The Hiroshima Peace Center, 1949, 1956. A city born from ashes and from great suffering, but rebuilt splendidly so. Here it is one of the few remaining structures after the deadly atomic bomb dropping on Hiroshima, this building here. And I'm sure the site of the Peace Memorial was chosen. You see, it's in the axis of this ruined building as a reminder of something which Vladimir Putin refuses to remind himself of. It's literally a triumph of life over death. Now an art center, 1955, 1957. These years, 1950s, 1960s in Japan had this heroic stance, which I admire very much. Unfortunately, they did use a lot of concrete, it's true, we live in a different time when, because of the climate change, we should be very careful about relying on concrete. But at that time, concrete was a material which expressed solidity, triumph of the shadows of the past, the shadows of the war, a rebirth, a country's rebirth. And I read that actually Japan had and still has, considering the size of the country and the population, the number of the of the population, very large usage, perhaps the largest in the world of concrete. Many buildings were erected, and there are many so-called brutalist buildings built with concrete in Japan. In Imabari City Hall complex, Kenzo Tange, 1958, talking about concrete it is. Kagawa prefectural government office in Japan, Kagawa, 1958. In very few years, Japan truly, I'm sure with immense sacrifices, they rebuilt the country, and Japan became a powerful economic wonder country. They are very hardworking, the Japanese, but they are also open. They study very carefully what is happening in other countries. They don't ignore what is happening outside of Japan, and then they filter through their own sensibility and their own rooting in their significant past, and the result is what we see. As I read at the beginning, there is a certain structuralism in his architecture, but not always. Here is more apparent. Kenzo Tange. But I admire mostly this heroic stance, this vigorous, vital situating oneself in life. Dedication, a heroic dedication to creativity, to saying yes to life, to asserting what they believed in. And I don't see today too many examples of such heroic, positioning in architecture and in life itself. And I think we need it. This is a very intriguing city hall, Kurashiki City Hall, 1960. Here is the plan, and let's see. Again, massive concrete building, which they needed, I think, this kind of architecture to fight off the tragic remnants of the Second World War and the two bombings on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was a country that was decimated. Of course, they had their own role in the dynamics of the war, but they lost the war. They were decimated, and they came back to asserting themselves very impressively. You look at those foundations, of the building, and we are dealing here with a country that is confronted with very strong earthquakes, but the solidity of the building and the belief in such buildings seems to discourage maybe sometimes even nature. Could we understand how many sacrifices were made in order to arrive here to, Japan, to assert itself architecturally in this way? Personally, I like more raw concrete than the polished concrete of Tadawando, because I think this one is in a way more honest. That polishing of the concrete that I think Tadawando even patented is a little bit problematic, because in essence, concrete is concrete. It's still a cold material. When you polish it in order to give the illusion that it is less raw than it is, but in its essence, it is a raw material. It is a conglomerate, as Frank Lloyd Wright called it. Housing, 1961. 1961, row houses. Let's see. Rather European, so to speak, in the configuration. But we see here the same concern for a dynamic architecture where diagonals are employed. You see the houses are not parallel with the street, but at an angle, kind of like in housing projects done by Arne Jacobsen in Denmark. Okay, now the Nichinan Cultural Center, 1963. I like the plan of this one, and I see some, now that I think of it, there is a building in Washington by IMP, which, if I look at the plan, I seem to see some similarities between what IMP did later and what Kenzo Tange did in 1963. Architects sometimes inspire themselves from other works, from other people, and they don't acknowledge it. Even some of the more important architects do this. This is one of my preferred buildings from the works of Kenzo Tange. It's very, it's very sculptural. It's very vigorous. One would say it's too vigorous. It's like a fortress, But I think it has virtues, expressive virtues. So it's a city hall, no, a cultural center, but it's like a bulwark of resistance. Maybe that's what he wanted to express, the resistance of culture vis-a-vis consumerism and, pragmatism or not pragmatism, mercantilism. It's like he wanted culture to defend itself against the assault of, materialistic concerns. And I like the patina of the concrete. But I would understand if not everybody would like it. But it is again a heroic architecture. Very much so. It's a fortress. This is what this person wrote. Kenzo Tange's buildings will make you believe in a better future. Yes, the vitality, the vigor of his buildings do have this attribute. Affected by the elements, all these so-called imperfections, they actually add to the the artistic impact of the wall of the exterior of the building. They don't subtract the so-called imperfections or dirt or whatever. They actually amplify the emotional force of the building, I would say. This is not a building that is trying to soothe you. It's not covered in plaster. It's not trying to comfort you by misleading sweetness. No, it's not caressing you. This is not a caressing building. This is a building that tells you culture is a struggle. It's the fight for spirit, for creativity. It requires effort. It requires sacrifice. It requires a heroic stance, and the building, I think, it expresses this. We Japanese architects, in our endeavors to resolve the problems facing modern Japan, that's what he wrote, have devoted a great deal of attention to the Japanese tradition and have, in the end, arrived at the point which I have sought to elucidate for you. If, however, there can be detected a trace of tradition in my works or in those of my generation, then our creative powers have not been at their best. Then we are still in the throes of evolving our creativity. I want, by all means, my buildings to be free of the label traditional. Well, because he wanted the new. He wanted to be true to his time and place. and he didn't want the comfort of easily borrowed forms from tradition. Although we saw his first house had, a rather explicit connection with what we call tradition or Japanese tradition. But I understand his desire to enhance, the need for the new, and not to, find, comfort in a easy, connecting connection with what we call the past. Now, the Olympic Arena, Tokyo, and I would oppose what he did in 1961, 1964 to what was done just the other year. I mean, in 2021 in Tokyo, and I'm referring particularly to the Olympic Stadium built by Kengo Kuma. So it was 6 years later that Kengo Kuma appropriating, in a way, the winning entry of Zaha Hadid. She won the competition for the Olympic Stadium in Tokyo, but for some strange reasons, the Japanese decided to grant the commission to Kengo Kuma, not to the winner of the competition, meaning Zaha Hadid. But I think if we compare the Olympic Arena that Kenzo Tange built in between 1961 to 1964 with what Kengo Kuma built, I think we see a difference, a significant difference. The same country, the same people, Japanese architects, but building very differently. What Kenzo Tange did was magnificent. Then look, a very fresh, very simple in a way, very clear architecture of confidence, but organic, fluid, truly an architecture that showed genuine vitality, and the aesthetics are as convincing today as they were 60 years ago. I mean, look, again, there is much more creativity. There is a vision here that these days we might not have. I mean, again, if you compare the stadium built by Kengo Kuma with these arenas built by Kenzo Tange, we see a great difference. I mean, there are two arenas, but these works are astonishing. They continue to inspire. Unfortunately, Kenzo Tange himself changed, and we are going to see towards the end of the presentation some newer buildings by him which do not have the same vision, the same force, the same assertiveness these earlier buildings had. Maybe it's the fatality of the human condition. We grow older and we become less intense, less clear, maybe even affected by too much success, and we could become grandiose or megalomaniacal. But here it's an architecture of splendid balance, and there is assertiveness, there is courage, but there is also still a sense of equilibrium, I would say. It's not an arrogant architecture. Well, we are going to see at the end of the presentation some examples which are less convincing, exactly because of it. Now I don't know why. Ah, yes, this I took from the website. I don't know who is that person crying there, but this was the stadium proposed by Zaha Hadid, and she did won the competition, but it was not built. It was built, the stadium conceived by Kenzo Kuma, and apparently Zaha Hadid thought, and her office thought that Kenzo Kuma inspired himself from their project, and they even sued him in court. This is the power of architecture, an architecture that doesn't try to hide itself in a fake modesty. It's a building that asserts, I think, the human condition with honesty and without mimicking, as I said, a modesty which is not there. I don't know if I described well what I feel when I look at this building. They are structurally sound, they are organic, they are modern, they are even Japanese, and they promote the spirit of the Olympics. It has that spirit of challenge, because this is what the Olympics mean. You know, those sportives, they challenge themselves. They want to achieve excellence, and the building, I think, the two buildings do this in a very inspired and inspiring way. We could call them the temples of sport. They could have been churches or cathedrals or temples, and they are the temples of sport. Now, a small Olympic, I already saw it. It's one of the two buildings, the smaller one. Now we arrive at a Christian building, a cathedral, St. Mary's Cathedral, and we receive a lesson in architecture and even faith from a country which is not, a Christian country. A cathedral for St. Mary in Tokyo, 1963, so built 60 years ago. Uh, you know, a spirit shouldn't have frontiers. And I think what he did here teaches us that, a good Japanese architect who was not a Christian could build a very convincing cathedral. Uh, the artistic form of this object, he calls it an object, or I don't know if it was him who wrote this text. On the other hand, has the twofold quality of both mirroring and enriching reality. This understanding of reality, which takes place through architectural creation, requires that the anatomy of reality, its substantial and spiritual structure, be grasped as a whole. From above, the building does have the cross very emphatically underlined. But the cross is actually a cross of light in the roof. It's another heroic building by Kenzo Tange. Here is a cross section, and the interior, as I said, is nothing less. I actually like more the interior than the exterior, particularly because of the finishes used, of the materiality. The inside is raw. It's raw, even rough. But the outside, for my taste, is too slick. Maybe I don't know. The administration of the church decided, or that was his decision. I prefer the interior, and you see here a glimpse, and we are going to see other images. I don't know why it was not left like this to outside, towards outside as well. Maybe because they didn't want to scare people away. I don't know, but the interior is magnificent. It's again, it's not a building that tries to comfort you through sweet, seductiveness of words. It's or images. It has to be raw, because the quest for spirit is raw, is difficult. And if we talk of Saint Mary, and we talk of her son, of Jesus, well, how was the life of Jesus? Was made sweet, and covered in plaster, and made with domestic surgeries, and with ornamental gingerbread the decorations. No, it was a struggle for life, but confronting death. And the building inside is through its materiality does have this power. Unfortunately, it was the outside, in my opinion, and I don't know why the spirit of the interior, in terms of space, it is expressed properly. But in terms of materiality, maybe it was covered later on. I would have liked the exterior to have the exposed concrete, just like in the interior, but it doesn't. I don't know if it was Kenzo Tange's decision, or the decision of those who commissioned him. And in the interior, they didn't try to embellish the building, but towards the outside, you see, it's too clean, it's too shining, it's too smooth. I mean, it's a different spirit. This should have been raw and rough, just like the interior. The shapes are correct, are like expressing the interior, but the finishes of the outside are a little bit pleasing, I would say. The cathedral of 15,000 square meters and the capacity of 600 seats was built between 1963 and 1964, so 60 years ago. I don't know who wrote this. One of the things that struck me from the church, especially when compared with other Catholic cathedrals in Europe, Latin America, or Asia itself, was its secluded character. That is, there is not a square or a public open space preceding the cathedral, as it is common in the Western tradition. On the contrary, the church is located next to a highway, hidden behind other buildings, and one can only have an idea of its size and magnificent proportions when viewed from a nearby pedestrian bridge. This is during the construction. And again, the interior is moving also, not just because of the space, but because of the texture of the exposed concrete. This is one of the most awe-inspiring things I've seen in a minute. I'm not an overly religious, but I can see finding God being relatively easy in a place like this. I don't know who wrote this, but the translation is not too good, or the English of that person is not too good, but the building is good. Although, as I said, I would have expected the exterior to express the drama of the interior better. Now we see this gymnasium, which was, it might even, I'm not sure what happened to it. Indeed, it was destined for demolition. Another heroic building by Kenzo Tange, and there was some news about it, but I forgot. Either the architectural community succeeded in defending it or not, but it was very seriously considered for demolition. And it's another very heroic building. You might even say perhaps too much, too heroic, but this was the spirit, the disposition, the mental and the mental disposition and the emotional disposition of Kenzo Tange towards a heroic architecture. It's about sport. Again, it's about the challenges that practicing sport at a high level require. Now, if this is Dutch structuralism, I don't think so. And I'm not even sure it can be called structuralism, but it is an honest, vigorous expression of how the building was built and how it stands. Now, it is true that the building stands out in a rather provocative way. If you look at the surroundings, what does this building have to do with everything around? It's a unique building that neglects an attempt to negotiate between itself and the surroundings. In a way, I would understand why perhaps some people might hate it, because it's in a way it's inhuman. I mean, you look at the buildings left and right, and then you look at this monumental gymnasium and you say, wow, what's going on here? Again, it's the heroic stance that is maybe not very common. In sport is common and should be common, because it's giving yourself completely to the contest and challenging your own limits. Yamanashi Press and Broadcasting Center from 1967, another great heroic structure. Yamanashi Press and Broadcasting Center, 1967. Here it is, the fortress of media. He built a later one, we are going to see later, but I think these earlier works by him until 1970s or 80s are his best works. No one can deny the vigor of this building and other buildings that we saw by him. And look at the mountains and look at the building. And then look at the houses at the bottom. You know, it's this is a public building, expresses the confidence of this institution, the media, the press, the news, uh, and you know, it's a bulwark of resistance in a way. It's maybe its optimism is a little bit unwarranted, maybe. I don't know, but it is an impressive building, especially seen from in these black and white pictures from around that time. Kenzo Tange. You look at the plans and the section, yeah, drawings, you know, diagrams, bidimensional. But the building is actually almost competing with the majestic mountains behind. Yamanashi Broadcasting Center. Today we are overwhelmed by news, news, news. Too much of them. But you know, in the right hands, broadcasting is could be a useful activity when fake news are discouraged, not promoted. It's a citadel, the citadel of broadcasting. Kenzo Tange. Now, I intentionally placed this much later work, you know, more than 20 years later. The Fuji Broadcasting Center, the same function, broadcasting, but we see the difference in the architectural tone or expression. Here it is. To me, this is a disappointing building. It's okay, he had the freedom to design whatever he wanted, but I cannot compare this building with this building. Here you can see that, in my opinion, his creative powers were declining. Yeah, he plays that spear there, but it's unconvincing. It's artificial almost. It doesn't have the force of this building. When was this built? 1967, I think. Yeah, 1967. So in 23 years, he changed from here to here. It's a loss. I'm really sorry. Maybe he should have had or could have had the wisdom of Constantin Brâncuș, who stopped working at 60. But he didn't. I mean, there are still, but you also wonder, was it designed really by himself? Because he had a very large office. We are going to see also a huge, the City Hall of Tokyo, a huge building, very, very large, I mean, tall, but in my opinion, his best work was done in the 60s and 70s. It's already, I mean, yes, it's not a building with mistakes. It's still you know, to an extent, a decent building, but a decent building is not great architecture. Another press and broadcasting center, Shizuoka in Tokyo. This one is impressive, and I don't know when it was built. I don't know how many broadcasting centers they had and have, in Tokyo and in Japan. But this one is also heroic. It's a smaller building, as you can see, but you know, just contemplating the fact that Japan has earthquakes. Here you see the people of Japan saying "Je m'en fous." You know, they don't seem to be scared of earthquakes if you consider how they build. Again, this is a typical Kenzo Tange building, assertive, optimistic, yeah, self-confident. Obviously, the architectural expression had the upper hand in the dialogue between the architect and the engineer. The engineer had to, you know, conform to the desires of the architect and not vice versa. These Japanese, they can build anything, really. It seems they can build anything. And they achieve perfection in the way they build things. I mean, these structural elements, you look at the profile of the steel profile of the columns, they are huge. You see the size of a door. This is, you know, solid, massive steel, an eye profile that is 1 meter or close to 80 centimeters wide, going all the way. That's why he can afford this sort of, you know, cantilevered parts of the building coming out of the core. It's very massive, very strong. Lots of steel there. Tokyo City Hall. A different Kenzo Tange, I already mentioned this very large building that he built. And unfortunately, he was affected by postmodernism. I'm not impressed by this architecture. Yes, it's probably functioning very well. Yes, it's huge, but it only proclaims essentially the unavoidability of high bureaucracy, and maybe Tange always had a certain liking for assertiveness, let's put it in this way. And towards the end of his life, I think, well, he was around, I don't know, 70 when he designed this, or his office designed this. I think his office is still functioning today. Yes, it's the city hall of Tokyo, but why does it have to be so grandiose? If you compare with his earliest work, meaning his house, and you arrive here, it's a distance. Of course, this is a public building and not a private house, but I don't know, something happened, I think, to Kenzo Tange. Maybe too much success. Maybe now I say something sacrilegious, maybe he lived for too long. I don't know. Too much success could change someone, indeed. But from this house to what we just saw, I think is a big distance. Now, as an urbanist, and we are approaching the end of the presentation, he did many studies, visionary studies. He was involved with metabolism, and these people had no problem to envision a Japan on water, extending on water, and with very futuristic architectures. I don't know if anybody commissioned them for these studies. It was their attempt, and I say there because it wasn't just Kenzo Tange. There were other important Japanese metabolist architects like Yonori Kikutake or Kisho Kurokawa. Even Arata Isozaki made proposals for, the so-called visionary urbanism. But this is what Kenzo Tange did. And it only shows that indeed the architect is supposed to try to be an agent of transformation of life and society, or society and life. A role many architects unfortunately forget. But the heroic stance that Kenzo Tange assumed seems to be diminished now, and in part with good reasons, because we are confronted with climate change. We don't believe any longer in the power of the human being to do only good things. We are more skeptical, more pessimistic. The climate, the warming is a reality, the global warming, the melting of the icebergs, the rising levels of the seas. And in this case, maybe we need a different kind of heroism. But spiritually speaking, situating yourself in life on a heroic, position might be necessary today, even though, as I said, perhaps a different kind of heroism. The heroism of being modest, the heroism of being, but not mediocre, modest, maybe to have more, I don't know, more subtle interests, maybe to build less, and certainly with less concrete, to maybe is a time of abstaining from building, and to reflect more, to contemplate more, to return maybe to the spiritual side of life, which we kind of neglected and assaulted the earth with too many constructions. This kind of optimism, vigorous optimism, which was actually a reaction to the madness of war, of the Second World War, we cannot easily have these days, although we are confronted with a war right now and not far away from where we are. But the expansion of humankind on water, although the next Osaka World Exhibition in 2025 will do just that, on an artificial island, will create space for the exhibition. Too bad, though, that like in the case of most exhibitions, world exhibitions, the buildings are destroyed after a short while, and this is certainly not sustainable. At the time when Kenzo Tange made his proposals, the people didn't think in sustainable terms as we are forced these days. So it was a different time. But I appreciate very much the desire of the Japanese to show proposals for it's not really about defeating nature. It's about creating interesting conditions of life, feasible conditions of life. But such belief in the human being today is less sustainable. And this kind of visionary urbanism is also with difficulties sustainable. But this doesn't mean that we should stop dreaming. No. And here he is contemplating his own scheme as an urbanist. A dreamer and a doer. And the best dreamers are those who are also doers. And the best doers are those who also dream. You have to be both, dreamer and doer and dreamer. Kenzo Tange. And this is the last image of the presentation. Tange did not imagine himself as a leading form giver. He sees himself in a state of transition. The role of tradition is that of a catalyst, which furthers a chemical reaction, but is no longer detectable in the end result. That's what he thought. He also contributed in the metabolist movement. Many metabolists had studied under Kenzo Tange at Tokyo University's Tange Laboratory. Thank you.